I came home to the sound of ocean waves and the scent of salt in the air, only to find a woman in heels planting a "for sale" luxury beachfront lots, inquire within sign right on my private land. She waved at a tour group behind her like a demented real estate queen, gesturing proudly to my sand, my dock, and my fishing shack as if she owned it all. One of the buyers asked if the tiki bar was included. I laughed out loud. "It better be," she said smugly. "I'm offering the full package." That tiki bar was built by my grandfather in 1963. I hadn't sold a damn thing. But Karen had just sold the wrong man's beach, and now it was time she found out. That day started like any other, with coffee on the porch and the quiet bliss of living a few feet from the wave. I bought this land years ago, far before the HOA was even formed. It was a slice of peace and legacy, passed down from my grandfather, then to my father, and finally to me. I took care of it meticulously, from maintaining the wooden pier to hand-restoring the boathouse with the same tools my grandfather used. So imagine my shock when I returned from a quick morning supply run to see a crowd of people walking across my sand with clipboards and sunglasses, nodding along as a tall blonde woman in a pastel suit barked out beach features like a tour guide at a resort. At first I thought maybe it was a local filming crew doing some sort of beach scene. But then I noticed the sign hammered into my driftwood archway, nailed right into the old cedar post. Upcoming Beachfront Estates, HOA Phase 2. My stomach dropped. I walked toward them, unsure if I was hallucinating, and that's when I recognized the woman, Karen Mallory, self-declared president of our neighborhood's HOA. A woman whose entitled delusion was only matched by her obsession with controlling everything that touched the ground within a half-mile radius of her house. And apparently now my beach. She saw me and didn't flinch. Instead, she waved like we were best friends and said, "Oh, I was hoping to catch you. We've had some very promising interest in your property." I blinked. "My what now?" She laughed like I'd made a joke. "Your section of the coast. I knew you'd want to be a part of something bigger." The HOA finally approved the Coastal Integration Plan. I was dumbfounded. "Coastal Integration Plan?" I repeated. "That's my land, Karen. It's not for sale. It never was. How the hell are you even showing this to people?" Karen looked genuinely confused, then offended. "It's undeveloped," she said, crossing her arms. "It's technically non-conforming under HOA environmental use policies, and you've left it open to community interaction for years. We assumed it was unclaimed for public integration. You don't even have a perimeter fence." My fists clenched. I didn't have a perimeter fence because I didn't need one. I had respect from neighbors, and more importantly, I had a title deed dating back to before Karen was even born. I told her calmly but firmly that she needed to leave. That she was trespassing and she was misleading potential buyers. Her smile tightened, but she waved her group toward the dock like nothing had happened. One of the men asked if boats could be docked overnight. Karen replied, "Of course. As long as they're HOA registered." That's when I nearly lost it. My blood boiled. She was branding my personal dock as an HOA utility. This woman was either out of her mind or trying to provoke a lawsuit. Maybe both. I stepped forward, standing between her and the tiki bar. "Karen, if you don't leave right now, I'll call the sheriff." She laughed again, but this time it was colder. "Call whoever you like. The sale's already pending." That stopped me cold. "What sale?" I asked. She gestured to a folder in her hand, flipping it open and revealing some amateur real estate mock-up. "I've already taken deposits from 3 families. Just preliminary down payments to secure their parcels. Nothing official. Yet." I could barely speak. She had sold pieces of my land, my family's legacy, without even checking if she could. I took a deep breath, trying not to let fury take over entirely. I told her again that I owned the land, and I would have her charged if she set foot on it again. She raised an eyebrow. "Then prove it," she said, and walked off like she'd just won something. Her group trailed behind her, murmuring among themselves as they climbed back into their golf carts and SUVs. I stood there in the sand, staring at the sign nailed into the wood. It was crooked and ugly, and it made my blood pressure spike. I yanked it down and tossed it into the trash bin next to my boathouse. But the damage was done. Karen had started something much bigger than she realized, and now I had no choice but to finish it. She'd tried to sell a man's beach behind his back. Now I was going to turn her little power trip into the worst financial, legal, and social nightmare of her life. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I stayed up pulling every document I had from my fireproof safe. The original deed, the zoning permits, tax receipts, the surveyor's plat map, even faded photographs of my grandfather fishing off the same dock Karen had just tried to hawk as community space. I called my lawyer, a bulldog of a woman named Janine, who specialized in land disputes and had no patience for HOA bullies. When I explained the situation, she actually paused in disbelief before saying, "That woman just committed fraud in broad daylight. This is going to be fun." The next morning, while Karen prepared for her second day of beach tours, I was already 10 steps ahead. Surveyors were scheduled. A drone was prepped to document the full extent of her trespassing. And I ordered signs of my own, bold, unmissable, legal-grade ones that would spell out what Karen had failed to comprehend. This beach was private, and her time playing queen of the coast was over. The morning sun rose on a beach that no longer felt like mine. I stood at the edge of the sand, coffee in hand, watching a drone hover silently overhead, capturing every inch of my shoreline. It was a strange sight. Technology mapping the curves of land that had been in my family for nearly a century, but now felt like it needed documenting for war. The surveyors arrived just after sunrise, a trio of professionals in neon vests and cargo pants, their tools clicking and beeping as they measured and staked the perimeter. I gave them everything they needed: the original deed, the decades-old coastal zoning certificate, even the 1938 shoreline plat signed by my grandfather's own hand. I didn't just want to prove Karen wrong, I wanted to make sure she'd never have the chance to twist facts again. As they worked, I paced the edge of my dock, every step sharpening my resolve. Karen had crossed a line most people don't even see. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had taken money from people under false pretenses, violated state property laws, and dragged my family legacy through the sand. Janine, my lawyer, was already drafting a cease and desist notice, and she assured me it would be hand-delivered to Karen within 48 hours. In the meantime, I had signs made up that left no room for interpretation. They were large, red-bordered, and made from heavy aluminum with words so bold you'd have to be blind or criminally arrogant to miss them. Private property. No trespassing. Not affiliated with HOA. I posted the signs along the boundaries Karen had so casually strolled past just days earlier. One on the dune entrance, one by the dock, and a third nailed to the side of the tiki bar, right above the old ship's wheel. Just as I was securing the last one, a silver SUV rolled up the gravel road and parked just outside my mailbox. A couple stepped out, holding a folder and looking around uncertainly. They were dressed like tourists, sneakers coated in beach dust, eyes scanning the landscape like they were trying to match it to a brochure. I approached them calmly, already knowing what this was. "Can I help you folks?" I asked. The woman looked startled, but her husband stepped forward and extended his hand. "We're the Evans family. We were told we could come take a look at our lot. Karen said we could see it any time this week." My blood ran cold. He held out the folder, and sure enough, there it was, a printed mock-up of my property, marked up with plot numbers and artificial landscaping. Karen had even given their spot a name, Lot 3, Ocean View Serenity. There was nothing serene about it. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news," I said carefully, "but this land's not for sale. Never has been. Karen had no right to show it, and certainly no right to take any money for it." The woman's face paled. "But we gave her a deposit. $5,000. She said it was refundable only if we backed out for personal reasons." I could feel their panic rising as the reality set in. I offered to show them the deed, and they took photos of my posted signs. The man nodded, his jaw clenched. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer," he muttered. She said this was legitimate. As they drove away, I felt the weight of what Karen had done settle heavily in my chest. She hadn't just tried to bully me off my own land. She had dragged innocent people into her scam. I imagined a spreadsheet on her laptop with fake parcel numbers and a growing column of payment. She wasn't just entitled, she was criminal. Janine called that afternoon with update. The cease and desist was ready, and she'd arranged to have it served by a certified process server. "This is going to blow up fast," she said. She took money. She impersonated ownership. That's textbook fraud. "You give me the green light, and I'll contact the district attorney." I gave her the green light. Then I called the county zoning office and requested an urgent meeting with the land use supervisor. The moment I mentioned the HOA's name and illegal development attempts on a protected shoreline, the tone on the other end of the line changed. They offered me a morning slot for the very next day. It turns out they'd already received inquiries from several buyers confused about the zoning laws Karen had promised them didn't apply. She had told them she'd work something out with the county. That phrase alone made the supervisor's voice tighten. "We take misrepresentation of land use very seriously," he said. "If she claimed an exemption she doesn't have, that's going to be a problem." The next day I walked into the zoning office with a binder under my arm and a fire in my chest. I laid out everything: the original land surveys, the dated title history, and the photos from the drone flyover showing recent foot traffic and damage to dune vegetation. The supervisor's eyes widened when I showed him Karen's brochure. "She's subdividing without authority," he said. "This isn't just civil. That's a violation of state planning code. You may have stopped a disaster just in time." That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I saw a familiar figure walking up the beach path again. Karen, in full pastel armor, clipboard under one arm, and a pair of sunglasses perched on her head like she was the CEO of the coastline. She paused when she saw the new signs. Then she saw me. Her lips thinned. "I was hoping we could talk," she said, her tone so falsely sweet it could rot a tooth. "The buyers are getting confused. Your little signs are sending mixed messages. We should try to coordinate." I didn't say anything at first. I just held up the cease and desist notice in one hand, then pointed to the camera mounted on the tiki bar roof. "Karen, any further contact regarding this property will go through my attorney. This is your official warning. Do not step foot on this beach again, unless you want to be explaining yourself to a judge." Her smile vanished. She shifted her weight, searching for some new angle of control. "You're being very aggressive," she said flatly. "This could have been a partnership." I laughed once, short and bitter. "No, Karen. You don't steal a man's beach and then call it a partnership. You're going to learn that the hard way." She stared at me for a beat, then turned and walked back toward the road, sand clinging to her shoes like guilt. I stood there long after she was gone, the waves lapping against the dock, the signs flapping slightly in the breeze. This wasn't over, but the tide had started to turn. The next few days passed in a surreal fog of disbelief and preparation. I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen would get the message after being served with the cease and desist and watching her scam begin to unravel. But I had underestimated how deep her delusion ran. The woman didn't just cross lines, she bulldozed over them like they didn't exist. That truth hit me full force on a Thursday morning, when I woke to the rumble of engines and the unmistakable beeping of construction vehicles. It was early, the kind of early where the sky was still trying to decide if it wanted to be blue or gray. I rushed outside, still barefoot, and froze at what I saw. Down by the beach, a yellow bulldozer was actively carving a path through the dunes. A dump truck was backing up toward the shoreline, its bed filled with gravel and cinder blocks. 3 men in reflective gear were digging what looked like a trench from the road straight to the edge of my dock. And standing in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, was Karen, shouting instructions like some twisted version of a general leading a beach invasion. My mind couldn't process it at first. I thought maybe they were city workers who had the wrong address. But then I spotted one of the signs I had posted, flattened in the sand, run over like roadkill. I stormed down the path, yelling before I even hit the sand. Karen turned to look at me with an expression that could only be described as smug victory. "You're trespassing," I shouted, waving my phone. "You're violating a cease and desist and destroying protected land." She didn't flinch. "We're exercising emergency access installation," she said smoothly. "Per HOA emergency preparedness guidelines. We need a proper road for fire and medical vehicles in case of coastal incidents. You'll thank us when it saves your house." I stared at her in utter disbelief. "Are you out of your mind? There's no authorization for any of this. That's my property you're ripping apart." She tapped her clipboard like it had divine power. "The HOA approved it." That's when I lost it. I called the sheriff, the zoning department, and Janine, all before breakfast. The construction crew, realizing they'd been misled about who owned the land, quickly packed up when the sheriff's deputy arrived. Karen tried to protest, claiming she had jurisdiction, but the deputy shut her down instantly. "You were warned," he said. "You've been served. You're now trespassing, and this is vandalism." She sputtered some legal nonsense about easements and civil codes, but it didn't matter. The damage had been done. When I inspected the site, my stomach dropped. They'd torn through a patch of protected dune grass that had been growing undisturbed for over 20 years. Worse, they'd left deep tire tracks dangerously close to a nesting zone for a federally protected bird species. I took photos of everything. Every trench, every broken plant, every tread mark, and sent them directly to Janine and the Coastal Land Trust, who immediately looped in the State Environmental Board. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. Karen had made it environmental. 2 days later, I met with representatives from the Coastal Land Trust and the State Department of Environmental Protection. They toured the damage and didn't even try to hide their dismay. The man leading the inspection, a biologist with sunburned skin and a very tired expression, shook his head as he looked over the trench. "This is going to cost her more than she realizes," he muttered. "These dunes are part of a migratory path. You can't just run a bulldozer through them like it's a sandbox." I handed him a copy of the drone footage I'd collected. The machines rolling in, Karen directing traffic, the very moment the crew ran over my signs. It was all there. By the end of that week, an emergency injunction was issued by the county. My property was not only declared off-limits to any unauthorized personnel, but the beach itself was now under review for designation as a protected conservation area. Karen's beach dreams were officially dead. Once that designation went through, it would legally block any development, construction, or alteration of the land without state permission. The timing couldn't have been worse for her, especially since her fraudulent land sale to the Evans family had just hit the courtroom. I heard from Janine the day the court filing went public. Karen was being sued for damages by not one, but 3 separate families who had paid her deposits. One couple had already sold their house and were living in a short-term rental based on her false promises. They had text messages, receipts, bank transfers, and even a recorded phone call where Karen had referred to my land as pre-approved beachfront pending minor title adjustment. That one line was enough to send Janine into a gleeful spiral of legal strategy. "She's cooked," she told me. "We've got her on fraud, breach of contract, and property damage. And I just got off the phone with the DA's office. They're very interested." While Karen's world began to unravel, I went on the offensive. I hired a local fencing company to install a massive wooden privacy wall along the edge of the property facing the road. It was 12 feet tall, reinforced, and topped with discrete motion sensors and solar light. I also posted a camera feed online, streaming from my tiki bar roof, showing a constant view of the beach with a watermark reading, "Private property, legally owned and monitored." The stream went viral in local forums and real estate circles. People started tuning in just to see if Karen would try something again. She did. One night, just before midnight, I caught a blurry figure approaching the beach on foot. The cameras triggered an alert, and I watched live as she tried to sneak through the side pathway with a bolt cutter in hand. She never made it past the motion lights. A high-powered spotlight lit up the beach like it was noon, and a canister hidden in the foliage sprayed a burst of blue dye foam that covered her from head to toe. She screamed and ran back up the hill, slipping in the sand and leaving behind a trail of dyed footprints that glowed under UV. I didn't even have to call the sheriff, he called me. Turns out someone had live-streamed the whole thing. The next morning, Karen showed up at the HOA meeting with a towel over her head and a thick coat of makeup that couldn't fully hide the blue tint still clinging to her neck. She tried to explain it away as artisanal body paint, but no one bought it. The footage was too clear. Her credibility collapsed in front of her own board. By the end of the week, residents had called an emergency vote to remove her from office. The very people she once ruled over with HOA fines and petty rules were now the ones showing her the door. And I wasn't done yet. The land she tried to claim had just become her worst nightmare, and I still had one more move to play. News of Karen's midnight dye bath spread faster than any neighborhood gossip ever had. By the next morning, her infamous beach crawl was the top post on several community Facebook groups, Reddit threads, and even one local news station that titled their segment, "The HOA President Who Couldn't Read a Fence Sign." The livestream replay racked up over 100,000 views, most of them leaving comments that ranged from outrage to pure comedic gold. Memes followed. Someone photoshopped her bolt cutter pose into a superhero poster. Another had her climbing over my privacy fence like a raccoon, captioned, "Karen the Beach Bandit." But while the internet laughed, the HOA seethed, and their internal emails leaked like a sinking ship. I read every word with popcorn in hand. The internal vote to remove Karen as HOA president had been set in motion days earlier, but now the tide had fully turned. Even her closest supporters couldn't defend what she'd done anymore. They tried to distance themselves quietly, pretending they were misinformed or that Karen had operated without their knowledge. One board member wrote, "We were told the beach was in limbo. We had no idea she had no claim." Another, clearly furious, demanded a full audit of the HOA's finances, citing suspicious withdrawals and event expenses linked to Karen's so-called development plan. It didn't take long before the entire board called an emergency meeting and, in a rare moment of united logic, voted to strip Karen of her presidency, revoke her gate access, and freeze any project funding she had touched. The woman who once paraded through the neighborhood with a clipboard and the confidence of a monarch now couldn't even get through the front gate without buzzing for entry. The next few days were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm, and I could feel the tension rippling through the neighborhood. Karen hadn't been seen publicly, but her lawyer had sent a letter, one of the most absurd I'd ever read. In it, they accused me of cyber harassment, unauthorized surveillance, and reputation sabotage. The letter demanded that I remove all footage of Karen from the internet and issue a public apology. I handed the letter to Janine and waited for her reaction. She laughed so hard she nearly spilled coffee on the file. "This woman is threatening legal action because she got caught breaking the law," she said. "Tell you what, we'll frame this one too. It'll look great next to the cease and desist." Rather than back down, I doubled down. The wall along my property was now fully reinforced, but I added a small touch of flair to the front gate. A sign hand-painted in old maritime style that read, "Private Beach, Access Denied TO Entitled Parties." It was petty. It was perfect. And it got attention. A few neighbors even stopped by to thank me, expressing their own frustrations with years of HOA overreach. Some of them admitted they'd been fined for things like mailbox color, bird feeders, or planting vegetables in their front yard. One man confided that Karen once tried to dictate what color he could repaint his back deck, even though it wasn't visible from any public street. Her downfall, it seemed, was long overdue. With the HOA leadership now shaken and under investigation, I decided it was time for a statement of my own. Not one made through words or courtrooms, but through something more symbolic. I began planning what I called the Access Denied Beach Bash, a private, invitation-only event to celebrate the full legal victory and the return of peace to my shoreline. I hired a DJ, set up tiki torches along the sand, and brought in a local barbecue truck to cater the event. I even booked a drone company to stream it live. It wasn't just a party, it was a message. A clear, undeniable message that this beach wasn't for sale, wasn't open for HOA expansion, and definitely wasn't a playground for people like Karen. The night of the event was magic. The bonfire crackled. Music filled the air. Neighbors danced, kids chased each other across the sand, and the sky lit up with fireworks that painted red and gold streaks over the water. I stood near the dock with a drink in hand, smiling as I watched people laugh and relax on the very spot Karen had once tried to illegally divide and monetize. The drone hovered overhead, capturing the joy and freedom of a beach that finally felt like mine again. It was justice, loud and bright and full of music. But of course, no story involving Karen could end without one last ridiculous attempt. Right around 9:30, as the fireworks reached their peak, a figure appeared near the fence line, half hidden in the shadows. Someone tried to slip in wearing a large sun hat and a cheap wig. It didn't take long before they were recognized. A teen with a phone caught the moment on video, Karen trying to blend in with partygoers, holding a red Solo cup and pretending to enjoy the music like she hadn't been publicly banned. When confronted, she claimed she was there, on behalf of the HOA for observation purposes. The crowd's reaction was swift and unified. She was booed off the sand and escorted out by 2 off-duty officers who had been hired as security for the night. They didn't arrest her, but the embarrassment was deep and unforgettable. The following morning, I awoke to messages from friends, strangers, and even reporters. The party clip had gone viral. People loved the concept of someone turning HOA tyranny into a beach festival of freedom. My inbox was filled with requests to interview, collaborate, or even license the drone footage. One local news station called it the most satisfying community takedown of the decade. Karen, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Her once bustling schedule of HOA meetings and neighborhood walkthroughs had vanished. She had become a ghost, her name mentioned only in past tense with a tone of exhausted relief. But the real cherry on top came 3 days later, when a certified letter arrived from the county clerk's office. The Coastal Land Trust's petition had been fast-tracked. My beachfront had been officially registered as a protected ecological site. The ink hadn't even dried on the paperwork before signs were installed, state-issued, metal-plated, and backed by law. Development? Forbidden. Sale? Illegal. Access? By invitation only. Karen's dream of coastal dominance was now buried under government signage and environmental protections. She hadn't just lost a fight, she'd cemented her own defeat in permanent legislation. I sat on my deck that evening, looking out over the ocean as the wind rustled the dune grass. Everything was calm again. My beach was safe. My neighbors were finally free from Karen's grip. And best of all, her legacy now existed only in memes, court filings, and dye-stained lawn chairs. I raised a glass to the tide, to justice, and to one undeniable truth: never try to sell another man's beach. I thought it would be over after the beach was declared a protected conservation zone. I thought that once the state signs went up and the drone footage became local legend, Karen would retreat into whatever corner of the world entitled people go when they're finally out of options. But that's the thing about people like her. They don't know when to quit. Instead of fading away, she doubled down in the most pathetic way possible. About a week after the Access Denied Beach Bash, I received another letter from her new lawyer. This one wasn't a threat over surveillance or trespassing. It was a formal notice accusing me of emotional distress, reputational harm, and financial sabotage. Apparently, according to her, I was responsible for the fact that nobody in town would return her calls, the HOA had cut ties with her, and her attempt to refinance her home had been denied. The most outrageous line in the document said I used unlawful social leverage and targeted humiliation to ruin her professional standing. Professional standing? She was a volunteer HOA president. Janine laughed even harder this time. She didn't just dismiss the letter, she added it to the growing file of absurdities labeled simply Karen versus reality. Still, Janine filed a response just to make things airtight, and she also submitted copies of the security footage, drone video, and previous legal notices to ensure no court would ever take Karen's countersuit seriously. The whole thing was tossed before it reached a hearing. But that wasn't the end. Karen didn't stop. She started posting anonymously on neighborhood forums, ranting about tyrants abusing conservation laws and rich landowners stealing public access from families. Everyone knew it was her. The grammar was the same, the caps lock abuse was familiar, and the fake names she used were so painfully obvious that even the moderators rolled their eyes. And then she tried one last move that nearly made me choke on my coffee. She had submitted a request to the zoning board for an easement to build a public walking path adjacent to my beach property. Not on it directly, but within 10 feet, close enough to undermine the privacy wall, close enough that people could peer through and treat the land like a sideshow. When I saw the application, my pulse spiked. She wasn't done. She was trying to creep her way back into relevance through a loophole. I called the zoning office and set an appointment immediately. I also contacted the Coastal Land Trust, who assured me they were prepared to oppose any construction that might impact the integrity of the protected zone. At the hearing, Karen actually showed up in person, dressed like she was running for office. Bright red blazer, hair blown out, fake smile plastered on like a bad Instagram filter. She claimed the path would benefit the elderly, offer scenic walking access, and foster community cohesion. The zoning board was polite but skeptical. I stood up, laid out the conservation ruling, and presented a notarized statement from the land trust opposing any adjacent development. I also showed them a report from the state ecologist warning about the potential disruption to native wildlife if pedestrian traffic increased in the area. And then I played the clip. Just a few seconds of Karen at my beach, barking orders at a construction crew, standing proudly on land she didn't own while giving false promises to buyers. The room went dead silent. Karen's face drained of color. The easement was denied unanimously. One board member even muttered something under his breath about nuisance applications. Karen stormed out before the final ruling was even read, slamming the door so hard the doorknob rattled. That was the last time I saw her in person. But her story didn't end there. Word got out about everything, about the fraud, the lawsuits, the environmental damage. Turns out the families who gave her money weren't the only ones. A deeper investigation revealed she had been quietly collecting planning fees from a handful of interested buyers outside the HOA entirely. People she met at beach expos and online forums. The total, according to the DA's investigation, exceeded $70,000. Criminal charges followed. Fraud, misrepresentation, illegal land use claims. The district attorney's office didn't just build a case. They made an example out of her. And when the court date finally came, the gallery was filled with people she'd once lorded over. Homeowners, former board members, even one of her ex-supporters who testified that Karen knowingly lied about the HOA's jurisdiction just to impress a local investor. She didn't cry when the verdict came. She didn't plead. She just sat there stone-faced as the judge ruled in favor of full restitution to all scammed parties and community service under the supervision of the very land trust that now protected my beach. I heard later that one of her first assignments was cleaning up invasive plants at the far end of the coastline. No view of the beach, just weeds, thorns, and salt spray in the face. In the months that followed, life returned to normal. Or maybe it became something better than normal. With Karen gone, the neighborhood relaxed. The HOA restructured and became more transparent. They even invited me to sit on a subcommittee about land stewardship and property right. I declined politely. I didn't need another title. I just wanted my peace. I spent more time at the beach now, rebuilding the dock with new lumber, repainting the old tiki bar, and watching the sun dip below the horizon with a sense of ownership that no piece of paper could ever match. And then, as a final touch, I had one more sign made. Not metal. Not state-issued. Just a simple wood plank hung near the entrance of my private path. It read, in carved letters stained with deep blue dye, "No trespassing. Especially not Karen." It became something of a local landmark. Tourists took selfies with it. Neighbors chuckled every time they walked past. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about memory. A reminder of what happens when arrogance meets the immovable wall of truth. I never heard from Karen again. Last I knew, she had moved out of town, quietly, probably hoping to start over somewhere new. Maybe she'd find a place without boundaries she could violate. Maybe she'd try again, somewhere people hadn't yet learned her name. But she'd never outrun what happened here. Not in the age of drones and livestreams. Her story had become legend, passed around like a cautionary tale. And every time someone asked me if it really happened, if someone really tried to sell a beach that didn't belong to them, I just smiled, sipped my drink, and pointed to the sign. Some people learn. Others leave blue footprints behind. One half.